Welcome to Cultivated Live for Wednesday, June 19th. My name is Jay Rosenthal. I'm the co-founder of Cultivated Media and the host of this program, Cultivated Live. And since we launched, our goal at Cultivated has been to be cannabis industry first, providing you with the most important, insightful, useful, and timely information. We do that through our daily newsletter called Cultivated Daily. We do that through our daily live stream, which is this, Cultivated Live. We'd love if you could follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to our YouTube channel, but most importantly, get our daily newsletter in your inbox. You go to cultivated.news. That's how to do it. Today, this is going to be great. I am joined by my co-founder and our editor-in-chief, Jeremy Berke. Jeremy, welcome.
Thank you, Jay. Pleasure as always.
And we are joined by Adam Terry, the CEO of Cantrip. Adam, welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys.
You got it. And because we all have some form or factor of Massachusetts roots, I think we should at least acknowledge still that the Celtics are still celebrating their victory earlier in the week. And because I'm welcomed in Canada as a permanent resident, also the Edmonton Oilers took their series to a game 6, which will be Friday night. So sports is still alive, much to the chagrin to most people in my house that are pretty much done with the 3 months of playoff hockey. But Adam and Jeremy, with that aside, we're going to talk about cannabis beverages today. And Adam, before we sort of dive into all things, give us a little bit about your background in the industry and then what led to Cantrip.
Yeah, thanks for asking, Jay. So I started out in the cannabis industry. You could conceive of it as back in 2010 or so when I joined the Cannabis Reform Coalition at UMass Amherst here in Massachusetts. So sort of the activism scene early on. We did a lot of work with the Massachusetts CRC and NORML, et cetera. Then I graduated college with a degree in chemical engineering, moved out to California because it was too cold in Massachusetts. And lo and behold, the only job I could get in California was extracting cannabis as a process engineer. So I was working for a company called Curavana, moving, just processing massive amounts of cannabis into oil, first using CO2, then ethanol and distillation. That was like the hot time when distillate started to become a thing in California. Moved back to Mass in 2017 to work for a local MSO called Temescal Wellness, operating in New Hampshire, Mass, and Maryland at the time. And then, I was just building labs, developing products, really just doing, I think, what is the best job in cannabis, which is getting to decide what cannabis goes into at the end of the day. I got to design all sorts of different products, powder, drinks, oral sprays, concentrates, cartridges, obviously, the gummies, the chocolates, pretty much everything that Temescal was producing was something I got to make a recipe for at that time. So it's a lot of fun. And then in 2020, after Massachusetts banned vapes for 3 months, which essentially killed my job for a little while there, I decided to strike it out on my own, start working on Cantrip about 4 years ago in 2020. Brought on my co-founder Dylan Lowry to join me, and we ended up launching through the Massachusetts dispensaries in June of 2021. So actually, about 10 days from now is our 3-year anniversary since our market launch. Received pretty well in dispensaries, but as I'm sure we'll get into, there's a lot of issues with trying to sell low-dose cannabis drinks through dispensaries where people typically want stronger, less expensive things. And then we moved into the hemp channel in 2022 when Minnesota codified the unintended consequence of the Farm Bill into state law, and then other states started to follow suit. And since then, business has just truly exploded, and the entire game has really changed. Now, hemp-derived THC products are one of the hottest topics in cannabis, which is honestly more annoying than it is helpful. But I'm excited to be here today and talk a little bit more about it and give everybody a sense of what I think works and what I think doesn't in the space.
Let me jump in there. Why is it more annoying than helpful? Give us your take.
Because we're having a lot of conversations about, what is it? It's a lot of conversations that have everything to do with laws and politics and nothing to do with, customer, patient access, or, what can be made well and what can be done well. I mean, essentially, Mitch McConnell legalized weed in 2018 by accident instead of the industry, at large taking advantage of this fact and making it work for their businesses. We have some people doing that, and then other entities who are vehemently against it. It's a lot of I had to go through this, so it's not fair for anybody else not to, have to participate in the system exactly in the precise manner in which I participated. And so I'm going to get really mad at it, and just leads to a lot of conversations that are ultimately non-productive, which is why I'm more limiting my Twitter presence these days, because it's just becoming more of a distraction than it is a productive conversation.
Yes. Well, agreed on the social media front. For those viewers who might not be fully engaged with this kind of hemp versus cannabis debate, Adam, can you help us sort of frame the distinction? Like, what are hemp-derived beverages, and how are they different from any other dispensary product that you can find on the shelf?
Yeah, I mean, to answer your second,
Not just beverages, let's say.
yeah, I mean, to answer your second question, at least for the beverage end, they are not necessarily any different than what you would find in a dispensary. They can be, and there are a lot of different ways to make THC products from hemp, and the way that you make it really matters, and how it's sourced really matters, and those are the kind of things that you can really get deep into the weeds on. But essentially, you can create hemp-derived THC products that are up to 0.3% delta 9 THC on a dry weight basis. There are multiple ways to get to that delta 9 THC. You can get it directly from the plant, as Cantrip does. You can get it through conversion chemistry by taking CBD and converting it into THC. You can go probably the most contentious, legally speaking, manner, which is taking high THCA flower and extracting it, which I think some people might be doing out there. And I think the part that a lot of people miss in this debate is, how do we start to draw lines and distinctions, because not all hemp products are the same thing. And, there's a lot of people out there also producing synthetic cannabinoids, which is a whole other kind of separate issue from just straight up, hemp-derived delta 9 THC, because you can create, all sorts of different acronyms from letters. And, I have my own opinions about that in particular.
Yeah, that was my next question exactly. Like, what is the difference between a Cantrip product versus, a Delta 8 Nerds Rope gummy you can find in an Oklahoma gas station?
Yeah, there are a lot of differences for sure. I mean, first of all, we don't rip off trademark, which is just straight up illegal in the first place.
Sure.
But
right there.
we try to make so as coming from the cannabis industry, right? I started out in cannabis in 2015 in California, where Prop 215 really didn't have a tremendous number of rules around it. But then I moved pretty quickly into Massachusetts and New Hampshire cannabis, and talk about restrictive New Hampshire cannabis at the time didn't even allow you to put branding on edibles or flower. It still might not. I haven't actually checked in on those regs in a while, but we create our products that are designed not to be too attractive to children, even though that's a pretty vague statement. We actually still use travel resistant lids on all of our products. For a while, we were not doing them on the single serving, but now we've just put them back on everything. So we have travel resistant lids. We have packaging and labeling standards that meet the requirements of 35 different states. We test our products for full panels that are above and beyond what most states require for finished MIPS. So we test for microbials, mycotoxins, pesticides, residual solvents, and heavy metals, in addition to, of course, potency. And we create our product from naturally derived delta 9 THC. So, the way that works is that you take that 0.3% or less that's in the original hemp flower from a USDA approved farm, you extract it into a crude using usually cold ethanol extraction. So that extract will be about 2 or 3% delta 9 THC. And then you use a series of chromatography and distillation steps to ultimately end up with a THC distillate. And you can kind of tell at that point, when you're looking at these concentrates, if it's converted or, directly extracted, because you'll be able to see the types of minor cannabinoids that are in those profiles. So, a product like Cantrip, the distillate that we're going to emulsify and put into our beverages, is going to have delta 9 THC, of course, probably around 85 to 90%. And then you'll see CBG, CBC, THCV, a lot of those standard phytocannabinoid minors. Whereas a converted product, you'll see delta 9. We'll probably also see a bunch of delta 8 in it, because it's really hard to create delta 9 from conversion without also creating some amount of delta 8 that then you're trying to separate out. And you'll see probably other minor cannabinoids that aren't necessarily what we call phytocannabinoids, which means a cannabinoid found in the plant. So we take that distillate, emulsify it, put into our beverages. And so the ultimate test result, you're not actually going to see much in the way of minor cannabinoids, but they are in there in trace amounts. It's just that it's so dilute in the product that it's below the limit of quantification. But that product gets it gets batched, it gets tested, and then it gets sold. So we follow the same standards nationally that we would for any other adult use dispensary system, with the caveat being that it does not need to exist in the adult use dispensary system. We primarily sell through alc bev distributors, so a lot of Anheuser-Busch distributors, a lot of craft beverage beer distributors. They sell to liquor stores, and those get that sold. We don't typically sell to gas stations or bodegas, at least not directly.
What are those conversations like, trying to get your product, through Anheuser-Busch's distribution system? Are they open to cannabis related products, and how do you kind of walk through these pretty arcane distinctions, right, to someone who's not paying attention to this stuff every day?
Yeah. Oh boy, does it take a lot of time. So I have, we make decks. That's the first and foremost. I mean,
Sure.
it is pretty similar.
Love
So
it,
I own a
bro.
liquor business here in Massachusetts, and seeking distribution is pretty similar. And what we're doing is what, you might do traditionally. The biggest difference is that, so I do all of the distributor outreach for our products. And at the beginning of this year, we started with 5 distribution contracts. We now have, I think, 18. And for the first 3 months or so of this year, I was just continuously, cold calling. I would literally just call the main line on the website and ask for whoever, considered new products. And it was a lot of, oh, we're not ready to do this, or we're not sure, we're interested, but what's going on? And, as the momentum for THC beverages has really built this year, seeing them, spread across total lines, which Cantrip was a part of that, their initial launch, and then, multiple subsequent launches, having a basis of credibility is really important to these distributors. And then really the next part is what every distributor wants to hear from every beverage brand. Are you going to put salespeople on the ground? Are you going to have visual merchandising in store? The legal stuff, it really depends on the distributor. Some of them dive really deep in it. I've been questioned by certain AB distributors on the definition of dry weight basis, which is something that's largely not been road tested in the Farm Bill, because the actual definition of hemp is less than 0.3% delta 9 THC on a dry weight basis, and dry weight could be construed to mean without water in it at all, right? That's kind of unclear, because when you dry cannabis, you don't actually remove all of the water content. You're going from like 70% water weight down to about 30% water weight, and that's what's considered dry in cannabis. But what does that mean for a beverage? Do we only partially dry it? I don't know.
Right.
And so, we make sure that all our ingredients are actually compliant with that by having enough, non-water ingredients to be less than that 0.3% total. And some of the distributors, they don't actually look into the laws at all. And they just kind of go, and they're like, we'll go till we can't. So it really depends on who the distributor is. Certainly, the AB networks, they're actually not, Anheuser-Busch is not self-distribute almost anywhere. They have, a network of distributors who carry their products. And so you go to abwholesaler.com, and there's, they have a list of all those in the nation. They all work together. So we had our first AB distributors in Minnesota, as probably expected, where Minnesota is the clearest laws about this. And then, with that success, where we're seeing, as much as 25% of sales in liquor stores in Minnesota are THC beverages, which is kind of crazy when you compare that to like less than 1% in dispensary channel sales as beverages, right? So, clearly that's garnering a lot of attention as it's increased, and Cantrip has its name out there. I've actually stopped having to cold outreach, and people are now reaching out back to me. It's funny too, when I started cold outreaching distributors back in early 2022. Or 2023, and I'll still sometimes get an email back on one of those threads that I sent cold with no response, 18 months ago, which is always fun to see that, it comes back around. So, you just be polite, you present your information as clearly as possible. You try not to get over-invested in the jargon, as I did for probably most of this interview so far. And
it's okay for us. For an AB distributor, not so much, I guess.
Yeah. It depends. Like I said, some of them are really smart and get in the weeds. Some of them are really smart but don't care. They're actually all pretty smart. Distribution is a really tough game. You don't succeed in it for very long if you don't, have a sharpness about you.
And AB is pretty particular about their distributors.
Yeah, I would imagine so. A lot of them are family businesses too, multi-generation families who have been doing this for 70, 80 years.
Yeah.
So I want to talk politics, but I'm going to ask one more question. That 20% number is pretty astounding. What's responsible for that 20% proportion of sales in alcohol stores versus dispensaries? Like what is the difference of the consumer?
Well, to speak to like the difference between a dispensary and an alcohol consumer is that, the original pitch, if you were to go back to my really crappy original pitch deck for Cantrip when I was shopping around in 2020, is that this is for new consumers. This is for people who don't understand cannabis in the first place and are looking for something, low dose and familiar to them. The missing part of that pitch was that those people are not showing up to dispensaries in the first place. And our brand means nothing to anybody. So they're not showing up to dispensaries to find our brand, right? And so the difference is these are people who might be interested in cannabis, but would never go out of their way to go to a dispensary. Going to a dispensary is not an easy thing to do. There's a lot of what you might online call conversion friction is the same thing in real life. You have to go sometimes to a different side of town. Maybe there's only 2 dispensaries in your town. Liquor stores are down the street from most people. And so they might just pick it up and say, oh, I'll give this a try. especially if they like the packaging or they like the flavor, or maybe the local guy recommended it if they're interested. And sometimes that means that they try cannabis for the first time. A lot of people, those people do graduate onto dispensaries. Boris Jordan said back in April of 22 that they see at Curaleaf a lot of people start with highly formulated products and move into flower and concentrates after that. Same thing can happen in liquor stores. And so it's just easier for people to find there. And with there being a surge in interest in alcohol alternatives, THC really scratches that itch in a way that non-affecting products can't.
So it's sort of the idea that these low dose hemp products can be the tip of the spear in terms of consumer familiarization, right? Like instead of walking to a dispensary, getting confronted with all these products, which may be too strong or too weak or whatever it may be, they're going to the liquor store, they're buying beer, they're saying, I'll give this a shot.
And it's just already built into their behavior, right? They're used to buying, some sort of inebriating product at a liquor store that's in beverage format. It's just they're just picking it up from the cart and putting it in. They're not driving to a different place to get a different thing. And it really is that kind of difference. The percentage numbers are all self-reported that I've seen from certain stores, and the stores that are doing really well with it tend to self-report. But we've had internal reports from liquor stores going back as far as 2023 in New Jersey, where I've heard that Cantrip is the top selling product period in their stores. And we hear all sorts of crazy numbers, definitely anywhere between 5 and 25% of revenue in those liquor stores go to THC beverages. So the liquor stores love it. The distributors love it. The only people who don't love it tend to be people who don't have a profit motive for it. So, yeah.
Let me ask you, turning to politics, let me ask you the tough question. Like I'm sure you thought of these risks to your business, right? The cynical take is that, the Farm Bill accidentally created this industry, like where you can extract Delta-9 or whatever cannabinoid, put into a product, sell it in whatever state has a market for it. The new Farm Bill is getting put into doubt. The negotiations seem to be difficult, obviously. Hypothetically, though, like what happens if they do close this loophole? Like, how do you pivot your business? How do you look at this risk? How do you understand it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really solid question. I mean, if the Miller Amendment passes in its current form and the Farm Bill closes this loophole, it's going to decimate not only all THC products from the hemp industry, but pretty much all cannabinoid products, and probably as a result, the farmers who grow the plants that support those cannabinoid products. So, pivoting your business at that point would largely mean having a large enough brand to then go back to the dispensaries and say, "Hey, let's license this to manufacture," but you're going to lose all that scale, and it just becomes a really, I think it would be useful to the dispensaries, but it's not going to be something that has the staying power of Tito's or any major liquor brands. The problem with beverage in particular is the economics really demand scale, and not even in California do you really have the proper scale on just an in-state basis to properly produce these things. I mean, we've seen multiple recalls of beverage products in the California system, from Can to a brand that I didn't recognize a few weeks ago. They just, dispensary systems are not really well set up for this. They don't have the same regulations that most of these beverage manufacturers who do it at scale have outside of the dispensary system. And so not really as safe, in my opinion, inside dispensaries. And so, I don't really know what it looks like. To be honest, we probably would start going to dispensaries to license it if it passed. But I think at that point, it would probably switch to some sort of lifestyle business. And we'd have to really make hard judgments about how to, get our money back for our investors and move the business from there. Because at that point, the chance of becoming some global national and global brand is pretty much shot until federal legalization actually happens. And,
Sure.
Who knows when that's going to happen at this point.
Right. So thinking about that idea, like let's talk about the states a little bit, right? Like this idea of them being policy laboratories, we're seeing this fight start to play out, I think most prominently in Florida. DeSantis vetoed a bill that would regulate the hemp industry. A lot of people in the hemp-derived space cheered that. A lot of people in the cannabis space didn't like that very much, depending on your political beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
What is your take on DeSantis vetoing this bill?
Yeah. I mean, it's good politics for him. It's bad politics for hemp. I mean, to be clear, that bill would have further regulated the hemp industry. I won't, say that the hemp industry is not regulated in Florida. There is FDACS does regulate the industry. There just are certain restrictions that the legislature wanted to see, which would remove a lot of smokable products, synthetic cannabinoids. Honestly, it would reduce the product content on the marketplace by probably 90%, decimated that industry, which wouldn't have been great for the business owners. But honestly, it probably would have been better for Floridians at large, because they're all out, in my opinion, I would never consume any of these synthetic cannabinoids in a hemp store. And so it's not my job to tell people what they can or can't consume, but if I wouldn't recommend it to family, I don't know if I, in this case, believe it should be legal. But the calculus on DeSantis's part, which was kind of crazy, and he has said this, or at least one of his aides leaked it, is that he believes that the hemp industry will then fund a fight against Amendment 3. And I am certain, I have essentially proof positive that at least some people in the hemp industry have taken that to heart and are going to decide to fight against Amendment 3, which would legalize, recreational marijuana in Florida. And that's just a crazy political calculus, in my opinion, on the part of the hemp industry, because at the end of the day, just because he vetoed this bill doesn't mean he's going to veto the next one. He wants marijuana not to pass in Florida. And, he'll probably, if he gets that as a result of the hemp industry, what stops him from then just removing it? Because it's not like he's going to enjoy people smoking synthetic cannabinoids out of shops. It's going to have all the same smell problems with a lot more public health risk, when you're spraying largely unresearched, cannabinoids that have been created in a lab onto hemp and then smoking it. It's like there's all sorts of long-term public health risks there that we just need to study if we're going to allow any of this to continue in the marketplace, as well as all sorts of really high dose. I mean, you can see this was reported on by Forbes originally, but GTI licensed its Incredibles brand to a company called Herb, which then put 1,500 milligrams of something called THCP, which, to be honest, even I'm not that clear on what these cannabinoids really are or do. It seems like a lot. 1,500 milligrams seems like a lot to me. It depends, I guess, on the context of the molecule, but these are really strong products being sold in places where not necessarily are all retail owners can have the scruples to prevent kids from accessing these products. So in all sorts of ways, I think this bill, the bill as written would have been, selfishly, it would have been fine for Cantrip because it allows naturally derived delta-9 THC. And what's surprising in that bill was that at the end of the legislative process, they ended up with a 50 milligram per package cap, 5 milligrams per serving, which originally was going to be 2 milligrams per serving and a 10 milligram cap, which was pretty restrictive, and it would have been very annoying. Ultimately, the cap they ended up with would have been pretty good for my business. But at the end of the day, I don't think anybody in hemp should be against legalization of cannabis in any form. And I know, a lot of people have their problems with Trulieve, but ultimately it's not Trulieve's fault that the laws are the way they are, and they are an MSO, so they're going to follow the route of the MSO. There may be some lobbying that they did, but they didn't vote themselves personally on those bills. And so I don't think denying Floridians the choice to purchase cannabis from a dispensary or cannabis from a hemp thing is really the right way to go, because the vision to me of trying to prevent marijuana from being legalized and still sell these coated hemp products that are smokable at stores is saying, well, I think they should only be able to access these products, which we actually know nothing about, as opposed to cannabis, which, again, given all, there are problems with regulated cannabis in its current form, but largely speaking, it goes pretty well for consumers. We don't see that many adverse health events there. So it's a ludicrous thing. And ultimately, DeSantis is not to be trusted. He will betray them. I've never been more certain of anything politically speaking than that.
That's true if you're in the hemp industry or a Floridian for that matter.
DeSantis is no friend to cannabis, no friend to a lot of people, but particularly not cannabis in any form. So I don't think that will work for them in the long run. But in other cases, there are places where that same hemp coalition does have, anytime there's a bill that's going to restrict my products, it's almost certainly going to restrict theirs. So we do have some aligned political incentives here, and so I'm not always trying to push them all away, but in my personal opinion, I would not permit synthetic cannabinoids if I were, the dictator of the United States. Luckily, I am not. But there are places where we're politically aligned. There are places where we're not. And ultimately,
just wait, we might get that dictator you want, actually. I know you want.
I want. Yeah, personally, let's get into that this with 5 minutes left.
One more question. Sort of rushing along here. It's a super fascinating discussion. The consumer safety aspect, right? I think. Yeah. As a journalist, part of what I've covered about this, hemp-derived space and part of what I've received a lot of criticism for covering it about is the consumer safety question, right? Like, there are companies like Cantrip that make a good product and care about the product and care about what they're doing in the delta-9 space. And there are companies that don't. And it's often up to the business itself I may be revealing my political sympathies, but I often think that like that's the job of government, just to tell companies how to act and not leave it up to companies themselves. So how do you think about the space more broadly in terms of that? And how are consumers supposed to know that aren't paying attention to this stuff, why a Cantrip product is good and why that Nerds rope we talked about at the Oklahoma gas station is?
I mean, it is a really good question. It's a really important question. I mean, generally, I do fall on the side of the government does need to have a hand in determining what can be sold and what cannot be sold, because as long as there's a profit motive to sell something that could hurt people and people can make money doing it, they will do it. And so there's always going to be places that essentially will sell anything that they can to make product to anyone that they can. So the government definitely has a role here. My hope is that this intense, very intense conversation that we're having about hemp products, under the Farm Bill right now is going to lead to some sort of affirmative legislation that will allow, create a system. Like I said, in my opinion, we should not be selling synthetic cannabinoids, mostly because we have a lot of, historical anecdotal data on how Delta-9 THC interacts with the body. We have relatively little on any of these cannabinoids that have been created essentially just in the last 5 years. And so, removing those would be a good first step, but it would kill a lot of there are a lot of people who built their livelihood because Congress said it was okay around these products. And, there does need to be some consideration for that. How can we transition them into dispensaries? Can we transition them to a better supply of Delta-9 THC? Can we just legalize cannabis federally would be a great step. So there's a lot of, things that we can and should do. What actually will happen is more a result of politics. If you look at like the political motivations of a state like Minnesota, right? I've heard a lot of people tell me, okay, well, if they close the Farm Bill loophole, we'll just continue operating under state law. But the whole problem with that is the same problem as the marijuana companies have, which is that you're suddenly 280E bound, at least as it stands today. Rescheduling notwithstanding, you are suddenly committing crimes. You're going to interact with the banking and insurance systems in a dramatically different way. You lose federal protections. You lose federal banks. And so it's not really a viable option to then end up in the state regulated systems. And I honestly just don't see Tina Smith and Amy Klobuchar, the two senators from Minnesota, allowing that to happen to every liquor license in the state, because they've now allowed there was an early version of their cannabis legalization bill that would have allowed liquor stores to actually sell flour under adult use. And that had to be nixed because they would all be committing a crime. Like you can't have liquor stores with liquor licenses selling those things unless they're really prepared for the consequences of that. And so that's not really a viable, Mike Turney has said this to me before. I'm like, this is not a viable method, path forward to have it suddenly be federally illegal. The whole advantage to it is that it is federally legal currently. And so, we have to do something here. We have to create public safety rules. We can't have products getting at the hand of children. We definitely need to be able to enforce trademark law at a basic level against Skittles and Nerd Ropes. Cantrip has appeared, in actual government testimony here in Massachusetts on the same slide as somebody, a hemp product that said Skittles on it and was selling like 1,000 milligrams of THC in that product. And, we have to start delineating between what is okay under hemp and what's not okay. Because as far as it stands right now, the way I look at it, if you consider synthetic cannabinoids allowed under the Farm Bill, how far does it go? Like, can you create methamphetamine if you could find a pathway from CBD to meth, and then it's suddenly legal meth because it's hemp-derived? I don't think so. So there has to be something here.
It's almost like a designer drug question at that point. It's like how can you tweak the molecule pharmacologically to stay one step ahead of regulators? I mean, that as a journalist, makes me uncomfortable.
But people do anecdotally report that Delta-8 and Delta-10 in particular have really therapeutic effects for them, and that is an argument that is used in some of these cases. But we need research on that. We need, and that's another, again, rescheduling will help. We can do more research. Some of these cannabinoids might have tremendous value, but we shouldn't just be selling them willy-nilly, and that's kind of the role of the FDA in the first place.
Yeah.
Well, it's my job to play the heavy right now and get everybody on with their day because we're coming up on 30 minutes. But Jeremy, as always, thank you for being my co-host today. Yeah. And Adam, CEO of Cantrip, thank you for making time, speaking your mind, sharing your story and Cantrip's story as well, but also diving deep on some of the thornier issues as well in the industry that we are facing. I super appreciate that. And just another acknowledgement that the Celtics won earlier in the week is helpful. And also that today is Juneteenth, which folks are celebrating across the U.S. So thank you for your time today. That's it for Cultivated Live. We encourage you, as always, to subscribe to our daily newsletter at cultivated.news. Follow us on LinkedIn. Smash the subscribe button on YouTube. Tomorrow, as always, I'll be with Krista Raymer from Vitrina. We'll be talking about cannabis retail. So that'll be at 10 a.m. tomorrow on LinkedIn, YouTube, my Twitter handle. Adam and Jeremy, thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.